So, welcome, Michael David Lukas, and thank you so much for taking the time to give this presentation and to share your wisdom about revision with us. We're really excited to see you. Lots and lots of people have signed up. Even more people are going to watch this video later. So I'm going to get out of your way and give you the reins, and you can start teaching, start your instruction.
Great. Thank you, Shirin. Shirin and I have been friends for a long time, and it's just such a joy to be here with you and to see all your successes. Recently, I never doubted that they would happen, but it's always a joy to see them happen and to witness that. So I'm going to share my screen. So this is a revision workshop. I like to call it a few simple questions that might save you a lot of time. So let's start with the problem. Um, Now, I am a professor at San Francisco State's creative writing department. I've taught creative writing for about 25 years. I've worked with a lot of thesis students, a lot of manuscript consult clients, um, a lot of just folks who are at a place where I think that you all are probably at, which is kind of the beginning, advanced beginner, have been at it for a while, and, are really good writers, but, there's always room to improve. I always like to kind of use the Hemingway quote that writing is a vocation. I'm totally blanking on it, but it's basically like we're all amateurs. Nobody's a master. And I really believe that, and that drives my teaching, and it drives my writing. So all of which to say is I'm there with you. These are questions that I ask myself when I am writing and when I'm feeling stuck. And so I want to kind of guide you through. I'm going to talk a little bit about the problem, give some definitions, and then we'll get to some writing exercises and a little bit of group work. So, as anyone who's been in a workshop, you're familiar with this type of story. Maybe you've written it yourself. Basically, it's well written. All the pieces are there, the characters are there, the plot is coherent, there are stakes, the writing is nice, there are some sentences that are really beautiful. It's unimpeachably well written. And yet, something isn't working, right? It's not gelling. When you pick it up, you look at the sentences and you're like, yeah, this is good, but you don't want to keep reading. It's not going to sort of keep you up at night turning the pages. And when someone brings this type of story or manuscript to a thesis meeting, a manuscript consultation, or a workshop, I think that often the response is something kind of vague about plot or character. Like the characters aren't really round, or like maybe give them more stakes or, tighten up the plot. And these are all well-meaning things that people are saying, but they're really hard to actualize and they feel very vague, right? You don't really know what to do with that. You're like, oh, of course the plot should be tighter. Of course the characters should be rounder, but what does that actually mean when I'm kind of going about the revision process? And so what I want to do is I have a series of exercises to kind of walk you through thinking about these questions, which should work, I should say, for fiction and nonfiction as well, particularly memoir. And yeah, but first I want to do some definitions. So when we're thinking about character, I always like the F. Scott Fitzgerald quote, which is something he wrote in his journals. Action is character. And I think it really gets at, in this kind of vague, runic way, the ways that characters work in fiction, right? The ways that they sort of come to life. Um, and I like it because it gets at something real, but it's also a little bit, sort of airy. And what it gets at that's real is that our understandings of character in fiction are defined through their actions, right? So, of course, when we're getting inside characters' heads, that's really important. That will um, give us a sense of what they're thinking and who they are. But when we really want to get a sense of like who they are, where the rubber hits the road is their actions. It's also the interface between character and the rest of the book, right? A character is just like a person, like, and it's kind of, very abstract. But when a character is taking actions, it's impacting other people, it's impacting the world around them, and then it's coming back to kind of, you know, create more actions. It's this kind of dialectical relationship. And so I like to think of it kind of like this little graphic here, character and action. That's how I kind of think about this F. Scott Fitzgerald quote. I actually always think of it as character is action, but the quote is action is character. But I think that it kind of works either way. Um, the problem with this graphic, and I think what gets at the difficulty of this sort of manuscript that is not quite there, is that characters don't exist in a vacuum, right? Our characters are in the world, they're interacting with other people, and then those people are responding to that. So the real graphic that I think more gets at what is actually happening in the novel is this here, where the characters are taking actions, which is influencing the plot, which is influencing the character, but the character is also influencing the plot, which plot influencing the action. It gets very confusing very quick. And I think that this graphic is not actually very helpful in thinking about, what's not working about your manuscript or how to improve it. But it is helpful in illustrating why it's so hard to talk about these things, right? They're all interrelated. I like to think of it as kind of like a whirlpool. Um, and so, what I find to be really helpful in kind of isolating what's going wrong or what's not working and what might be improved and how it might be improved are two craft concepts that are somewhat outside this little triad, but very much connected to them. Desire and causality. So we're going to spend the rest of our time talking and thinking and writing about these two concepts, desire and causality. And I put them in the places that they are because, I think this is kind of where they live. Desire lives in this murky space, kind of to the left of character and a little bit above action. And causality is very much, firmly rooted in the plot. Um, so we're going to start with desire and then move on to causality. Before we get really into it, are there any burning questions, anything in the chat where people are like, I don't understand this at all. This guy's crazy. No, okay. Um, anything? Okay. So let's move on to our little mini lesson in desire. Oh, sorry. We're not going to do that yet because I don't want you thinking about the question. First, let's define what desire is. So, desire is very simply what your character wants, but it's more than that. It's the glue that holds everything together. It's the engine of the novel. I think if you can really isolate any one thing that makes a book work or not work, it's the author having a really firm sense of the character's desire and being able to articulate that to the reader. Because that is really, if anything, is the sort of like wellspring of a novel working brilliantly, it's the character's desire. Um, and I think that people, including me, definitely, will have this kind of hazy sense of like their character's desire, like what they want in the world. And it'll be some sort of very, abstract noun like recognition or acceptance or, serenity or something like that. And it won't be something concrete. Now, I understand that not every piece of fiction is about a character. I think this is the hard thing because, like, really plot-driven fiction often has a character who wants a specific thing, right? They want that $1 million in the bank vault, and they're going to do anything they need to do to get it, right? That's a very specific, concrete thing. But most literary fiction, it's a little more abstract. And so I think it's worthwhile to spend a moment sort of thinking about now, you guys may have multiple projects going on at once, but for the purposes of this, I want you to kind of isolate one project. It may be the thing that you're working on right now. It can be a memoir, it could be a short story, it can be fiction. I don't know if it can be poetry. Give it a shot if you're a poet. But just choose one project because we're going to kind of go through a lot of different questions that are connected to each other. So, question number one about desire. What specific concrete thing does your protagonist want? And now if you have a couple different protagonists, choose one because we're going to kind of run with this. And so for an example, think about um, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the HBO show Heated Rivalry, which I just finished watching, which was a romance novel before that, about the two hockey players who fall in love. Anyways, I'm going to use that as an example, and it's a pretty straightforward story about these two hockey players who fall in love and have like a kind of torrid romance, and they're both closeted in different ways, and by the end they kind of are able to come out. And so in this example, the guy who I think is the main character, Shane, he instead of saying that he wants love or acceptance, what you would say is Shane wants, a deep and meaningful relationship with Ilya, who's his rival, and the ability to share that relationship with his family and the greater world. So you see how those are very different sort of articulations of what does your protagonist want. So let's take about 4 minutes to answer this, to write this down, think about it, and, kind of go from there. Oh, repeat the two articulations of desire from the TV show. One would be that he just wants love and acceptance, and the other one would be that he wants a deep and meaningful relationship uh, with Ilya and to share that with the world. All right, take another minute or so. This one I think can be relatively quick. All right, so the next question, we're moving on, is what is behind this desire? Now, I think a lot of people have thought about like what is the sort of concrete thing that is driving your character's desire? And often it shows up in backstory. Like what's the thing that is kind of like created this want that the desire that the character has that is driving them forward and driving the story forward. And I like to think of, in literary fiction, it can kind of come out slowly, but I always think about in superhero movies, there's that one moment where everything was crystallized and that sort of stands in for all the, things that happened to this character in their life that led them up to this moment. So, what I'd like you to do is sketch three kind of superhero backstories, which is like a flash of a moment where this character's desire was crystallized. Now, for the show Heated Rivalry, it's actually kind of interesting. I felt like that was something that was wanting at the beginning, right? We have this sense of we don't really have a sense of who this character Shane is from the outset and what his relationship to his sexuality is. Um, and so I personally wanted a moment of backstory where he's dating a woman and sort of like she's the perfect person for him according to like, heteronormative conventions, and he's totally unhappy. Um, that I think would have filled in a lot of questions, answered a lot of questions for me. So I'm not going to second guess the people who did the show, but point is that it can be really useful to have those kind of moments to show where the desire comes from, or the roots of that desire. So take a couple minutes, sketch those out. Doesn't have to be three. If you really like one, you can just kind of go with it. All right. Take a moment to finish that up. There was a question of can desire change as um, the story moves forward. And it definitely can, but I do think that it's most satisfying to a reader to have one kind of like overarching thing that, obviously is adjusting and being clarified and etc., but that's driving things forward. Certainly there are examples of books or even stories where the desire changes halfway or they realize that the desire was wrong-headed. But that often happens at the end. So actually, that's a perfect segue to the next question. What does your protagonist think will happen when they achieve their desire? Now, often this is, especially in literary fiction, this is a mistaken belief, right? They have this sense that, oh, if I, rob the bank and get all the money from the vault, like I'm going to live happily ever after. But as we all know, when you rob the bank and get all the money from the vault, things are usually more complicated. Or in the example of Heated Rivalry, the first season ends with them driving off into the sunset, having just come out to Shane's parents, and everyone feels good. But one can only imagine what they're going to encounter when they come out to all the hockey fans out there. And so, hence season two. So just think about what your protagonist thinks will happen when they achieve that desire. Um, Write that down. And if you want, write down what actually happens if you have a sense of that desire or being a mistaken belief. And take another minute to finish up. Sure, and I want to put people in groups of three or four. Is that possible?
Yep, that is. Give me a
Cool.
minute. Okay, I'm ready whenever you
Awesome.
decide.
Okay, why doesn't everyone finish up? And then or Shen's gonna split you into groups of three or four. And what I'd like for you to discuss in these groups for about 7 or 8 minutes is to share what came up, what, you know, for any of the questions, what was kind of interesting, confusing, what the sort of questions you still have, what was clarified, if anything, just what, came up in the process of writing these things down and thinking about your character's specific concrete desires, where it comes from, and where it might lead them. Welcome back. I'm very curious to hear what came up, but I feel like if you have something that you want to share, maybe just kind of write it down, and we'll have Q&A at the end, and we can kind of get into everything. And in some ways, the causality builds on the desire. There's a reason that the desire is first. Um, all right. Is everyone back? Can I get started?
Yeah?
Okay. Next up. In talking about causality, which is one of my favorite, probably my favorite craft concept right now, I think it's really the kind of secret sauce or the glue, or those aren't good metaphors to mix. But of fiction that is working, and to kind of get at what it is, because it's a pretty vague term. I like to think about E.M. Forster's definition of story and plot. So, in aspects of the novel, which he wrote, almost 100 years ago now, he is talking about this difference between story and plot, which I think is still useful to us. We've defined a story as a narrative of events arranged in their time sequence. A plot is also a narrative of events, the emphasis falling on causality. Now, let's dig into that. So, what he's saying is that story is a bunch of events or plot points or things that happen that are connected chronologically, right? This happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. Whereas plot is a series of events or plot points or things that happen that are connected causally. Now, what does that mean? We can go back to Ian Forster's famous quote, which probably many of you are familiar with. A story is the king died and then the queen died, and a plot is the king died and the queen died of grief. Now, I think that's really nice and pithy, but it really gets to what the difference is because plot can also be the queen died of grief because the king died, right? So, in that sense, you're switching the events chronologically, but the causality is still there. Um, all right. So, now that we've defined causality a little bit, we'll ask our first question. Going back to your specific and concrete desire that you identified for your character, what is standing in the way of your protagonist achieving their desire? Now, we're not quite at causality, we're just kind of dipping our toes into it, but this is an important question to ask ourselves. So, and I would clarify a little bit, what are the internal and external factors standing in the way of your protagonist achieving their desire? So if we go back to our example of heated rival, we have Shane, whose concrete specific desire is a deep and meaningful relationship with Ilya, his rival, and to be able to share that relationship and their love with the world. What's standing in the way of them achieving this desire is, society's homophobia, his own shame, his parents, the hockey players who are going to be, reacting in ways that he doesn't know, his imaginations of how these hockey players are going to react, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think I can imagine that you guys all have a sense of what are the things standing in the way of your protagonist. And I will get out of your way and allow you to write down as many as you can, internal and external, in the next 3 or 4 minutes. Okay. So now what I want you to do is I want you to take out a totally new piece of paper, if you can do that without too much trouble, or flip over the paper that you've been writing on. Give yourself some space and oops, we'll come to two. So sketch out, say 5 to 15, 7 to 12 plot points that happen in your book. Now, if you have multiple plot lines, you can focus on one plot line just like you're focusing on one character. Um, and just try to condense what happens um, into a list of things that happen as they occur in the manuscript or the story or the memoir, what have you. Um, and give some space in between them. That's why I wanted us to have a new page. All right. So let's finish up. You don't have to have all of them. I know some people can get really granular with their plot points. Some people are kind of being really, 30,000 feet. But take what you have. And now what I want you to do is I want you to think about the causal relationship between each plot point and the next. So it might not be there. It might be abstract. It might be kind of hazy, especially if you're jumping around in time. Sometimes it can be a little bit more tenuous. But I think usually there is something. And if there is nothing connecting them, then I think that's a good opportunity to think about, well, why are these arranged in this way? Why does this thing come after this? Um, because the order and the sense of cohesion that a reader has in reading the book is in a lot of ways based on these causal relationships. Michael goes to the store. I don't necessarily meet Jason at the store, but maybe I get some milk. I go home and the milk is spoiled and I'm in a bad mood and it causes me to, run a red light and Jason is the police officer who pulls me over. So that's a really nice causal chain that connects Michael goes to the store and Michael meets Jason. Doesn't have to be that convoluted, but think about those connections and I'll give you 4 or 5 minutes to write those down, think about them, consider what is that glue that's sort of connecting the plot points. Yeah, that's a really good question. Can backstory be a plot point? Yeah, so and that's sort of like in the character's mind, but something can trigger a memory of backstory, or there can be some reason why a backstory goes in this particular moment, and then that can kind of cause, give us a reason why the character is doing the next thing. And so that's a sort of example of how backstory would cause, be linked in a causal chain. Take another minute or so. You don't have to figure out all the causal connections. That would be a lot, but just a couple. All right. So finish up the last little thing you're working on, and then Shirin, if let's see if there's a couple questions. Uh question from Shirin. Is it still causality if because of one plot point there are high stakes when the next arise, even though that first plot point didn't? Yeah, definitely. I mean, sometimes there's actually multiple sort of like plot lines coexisting in one narrative or one part of a novel, and they're kind of building on each other. So yeah. Okay, so let us break into groups and again, let's discuss what came up, what questions you have, uh, what you kind of came to in this process of writing this down, what still isn't totally clear, and any of these, questions will also have some question and answer after the small groups. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope that was helpful. Oh, and I forgot to say, maybe this is self-evident, but the way that you improve your manuscript is by clarifying the desire, bringing it more to the surface, and sort of making those causal connections more apparent and more like making that glue show and showing us how the sort of different plot points are dominoes in a row that brings us to the end. So I imagine that there are some questions. I'm happy to take them. Should we do them? Maybe we can do people just kind of raising their hands and unmuting themselves. Shirin, if you don't mind, maybe doing the little hand raise thing. And then if Shirin, if you could call on them, um, and
Yeah,
then if
actually,
people
you
want to
guys,
put them in the chat.
yeah, if you do an electronic raise, then you'll get straight to the top of my screen, so that helps. And then I'll spotlight you while you're asking your questions um so that Mike can find you more easily. So Jane Ann, you're starting.
Hi, sorry for the crazy red light. I've got a migraine. Thank you for this. This actually happened to come at the right time for a lot of us, I think, whether we're in our first draft or we're starting to revise and realizing we need to make some of these things more clear. Um, I'm writing a dual timeline and multi POV for my first book, and I'm wondering about some advice when looking at the causal chain, especially when you're switching timelines, and how to use backstory effectively to to link it because like I know from speaking with different agents just how important the dominoes are. And if you don't
Mhm.
have the dominoes in order, they get really impatient and don't finish reading.
Yeah.
So, um, can you talk about dual timeline and causality a little bit?
Yeah.
I know
Um,
it's a complicated.
no. I'm there with you.
Okay.
I have written a couple multi POV books. I mean, I guess all my books are multi POV, but two of them are very much kind of um very like, it was a big part of what the book is about. And so I think that two things. One is that every plot line has to kind of work on its own and have its own causal chain that is tight. And with a multi POV, multi plot line book, it has to be especially tight because the reader has to sort of like hold on to what happened while they're reading the other POV. Um, in terms of the interaction between the different plot lines, that's important, definitely. And there's a tension that is created of its own between the different POVs. And, but that's more of a tension, I think, between the author and the reader in a way. And what I mean is the reader understands that there's going to be some sort of connection between these two plot lines, that they're going to, in a lot of fiction, they're going to come together in some way that's a surprise or that's kind of interesting. Or at the very least, there's going to be in, kind of super literary fiction, sometimes there's multiple plot lines that never come together in the actual plot, but are, thematically kind of resonant and that emerges as the book goes on. And so all that's a long way of saying that I would really focus on the individual plot lines and when I've written all of the books that I've written that are multi POV, I've unbraided them, worked on them separately, and then rebraided them. And it's only in the later drafts that I'm really paying attention to how everything hit. Um,
Ooh.
one of my books is different timelines, so no one's interacting, but sort of things are being revealed that are impacting other timelines. But the one that I just finished is, these characters are all existing in the same place at the same time. And so it really matters what one person is doing because that's affecting what the next person is doing. And so that can be
Yeah.
more of a causal chain where, like, you know, I go rob a bank and then the bank teller, comes to work and the bank is closed and they go, to their country house or whatever, it may be that happens.
Can I ask you a
Um,
question? When you say about the plot lines, do you mean timelines? When you said
or
like
just like the
focus.
very, if you said that there's two sort of like plot lines, right, for your book. For
Um,
mine, for both of
right,
mine,
right.
I've had three. And I think of,
Mm-hmm.
even for the one where they're in the same time and place and they're impacting each other, I think of
Mm-hmm.
each point of view character as being their own plot line
Got
because
it.
they all have their own concerns that are impacting each other but are separate.
Okay. So interesting. Okay. Thank you so much.
No, no problem.
Thanks for your question. Shannon, you're up next.
Hi. So I'm really curious about this throwing away of the first draft.
Yeah.
And so I have kind of like a two-part question. I'm wondering if you always did that or if that's something you grew into with confidence, because to me that seems like a really confident thing to be doing. And the second part of that is like we hear about, are you a plotter or a pantser? And I'm wondering if this first phase that you throw away is kind of a pantser kind of mindset, like a flow mindset that you're in, and then the plotting happens afterwards. I was just hoping you could tell us more about that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that's right. I mean, I think that there is a sense of like those early drafts are more, kind of finding my way. They're the zero draft. They're just trying to kind of figure out what's happening. And then when I come to the end of it and I'm kind of throw it away and start over, it's more kind of like using that editor's mindset. That's more kind of like trying to assign like, okay, how's this all fitting together? In terms of my development, that development as like my process. It started when I was in MFA school, and what was happening in at that moment for my first novel is that I was learning so much and realizing so much about myself as a writer and about the book that by the time I would come to the end of a draft, or even some of those drafts were halfway through the book, I would realize, oh, I'm writing a totally different book. Or I now have the skills to write this thing that like I thought I had the skills to write before, but I didn't. And it was just so completely apparent that it was, garbage that I would start over. And then I did that. That probably happened three or four times before I realized like, oh, this is working for me. Like I need this to be able to really revise to have a new vision of what I'm doing here. Um, and like I said, I've been sort of tricking myself by writing really kind of sketchy, pantsy, like you said, first drafts by hand. And I'm going to try to trick myself again by I've never really plotted out a book, like just like outline style. But I'm going to try to do that with my next book, which is a little bit more of like a thriller um, ish. And so I think, kind of lends itself to that style of writing or that style of, that process of writing. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Shannon. Chris, you're up next.
Okay, so Shirin, you and I have a common colleague, a literary agent who's, I won't say her name, her initials are HJ, and she she was talking to me about more than once about breadcrumbing. And I it's one of those things where, it's like on the surface I understand it. To kind of drop those little hints, I guess, along the way to make the ending or make the final act not quite such a shock, or at least that's the case in my first manuscript. I'm trying to get over the finish line here. But when I try to put it into practice, and I don't know if you've experienced this, if you have any advice, when I try to put that into practice, what I find on the page are these weird kind of sore thumb, obvious, and it's been really, really difficult to kind of work those breadcrumbs in a way that doesn't affect the pace. Does that make sense?
hmm Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think that if you're just trying to slot it in, I think this is an example of why it's hard to work with a manuscript that is, cohesive, right? Um, but it sounds like you're maybe at the point of your process where it's far along, you have an agent and you know or it sounds like that and she's giving you advice, etc. So in that case, I would, if it were me, what I would do is I would kind of like, and I've been in this experience, right? Where the plot, for me, it was like these three plot lines weren't connecting well, and it wasn't giving the reader quite that sense of enjoyment that you should get from a plot. And that's what breadcrumbing really is like giving them a little bit to keep going, and they'll be like, oh, that's going to be important, like um and so what I would do is I would personally like sketch out the book in a way that feels like abstract, that is apart from the actual manuscript. Like what I like to do is I like to write plot points on an index cards, and then I'll lay them all out on the floor, and I'll be like, oh, either I can move this one here, or maybe there's a scene that can go here. And when you don't have the actual words in front of you, it kind of opens up space for like seeing it in a different way and being able to be like, oh, I could put this scene here. Like I'm thinking about this book that I'm reading right now, which is really great. Kate Atkinson's Life After Life. It came
Oh,
out like 20
love that.
years, 15 years
Yeah.
ago. And so there's this one really beautiful breadcrumb. I mean, it's a weird book because it's like this person keeps reliving her life over and over again. But there's these characters keep showing up and playing different roles. And you know that when a character shows up again and again, they're going to play some sort of role in the end. And so there's this one character who's next door neighbor, who's this Jewish family, and in one of the sort of lives, she has a crush on one of the boys. And I can just tell from the way that the plot is playing out that this family is going to be important down the road. And with that, it was like this breadcrumb was these people moved next door and the family's talking about them. And then in the next iteration, she has a crush on them. So you can kind of see them getting more and more important. And that feels to me like a really nice breadcrumb because it's real. It's a part of the character's real experience. And it feels maybe like an important throwaway, and maybe in the back of your head you're like, why are they focusing on this? And if you have confidence in the writer, then you trust that this thing is going to come out later.
I
And
trust
I feel
that.
like that's what you want to do with the breadcrumbs.
Yeah, I trust Kate Atkinson way more than Chris Roche, but yeah, well, that does help. Yes, thank you. Thank you for
Okay.
that. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Lita, I hope I pronounced that right.
Yes, you did.
Well, hang on.
I want to
think I pressed
ask.
the wrong button, so Mike might disappear for a second.
Oh,
Nope.
boom. There you are.
Oh,
Hi, Lita.
Oh, okay. Hi there. How long does it take you to write these drafts, and which one takes the longest?
Mm, good question. I'd say 6 months to a year. Um, Depending. The earlier ones, I mean, it depends on kind of like what iteration of my process we're in. For each book, it's kind of different. Um, for, when I'm just kind of writing it by hand, and that allows me not to pay attention to the language, and it allows me to kind of just rush through it in the way that um the plot is very fluid, and that's focused on plot and discovering the characters. And with those ones, it could be 3 to 6 months. But then when I'm really writing the dang thing, it'll take a year. And I don't know. I mean, I'm trying this new plot point thing out, which my one of my best friends is a writer as well, and he has not written for a long time, but he's coming back to it, and so he's actually doing plot points as well. So we've been talking a lot about it, but we'll see how long that takes me. I'm giving myself a month to write like a really detailed outline. And a lot of that is just going for walks and thinking about it. I think it's really important for writers to recognize that the thinking time is so important, and you should be giving yourself and honoring that time that it takes. So yeah, it really can totally vary.
thank you, Lita. Um, Michael, we have five now, 5 hands up. Oh, four, because Lita didn't. Um, so four hands up. Can you go over a few minutes?
Yeah, happy to
Four?
answer all of them.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So no more after Virginia, but Jeannie, let's start. Let's do you next.
Hi, I think you may have answered this when you talked about doing the plot points. The Matt Bell book, Refused to Be Done.
Hmm.
He's
I haven't read it, but
he's the first fiction writing class I took 3 or 4 years ago was with Sandra Schofield through the Iowa Writers Program, and she said exactly what you said about she deletes from her computer her first draft and then rewrites the whole thing, and it made my heart stop beating. It just seemed like such a but then she said, step away from it and write this list of just what happens and see if what happens carries through. I mean, and then work on your outline of what happens or your plot points, and then go back to
hmm.
start doing some rewriting. So, you may know a whole lot more just from looking at your outline of plot points or your outline of what happens. And
Yeah.
that I'm 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 just getting to the point where I can kind of do that, and I can see how you could chase your tail and rewrite stuff that's going to go out the door, in 6 months.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
so, so the revision seems.
Jeannie, excuse me, in the interest of time, because
Oh, sorry. Okay.
did
Sorry.
you have a question, like a specific
I
question?
can bounce off that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Um, so yeah, no, I think I'm totally in agreement with that. I think that what I would say is that in the end, I feel like it saves time for me to do that. And I spent so much time, like you said, chasing your tail, um, and then throwing something out. But I think that what I would say is no matter what approach you choose, to really value and honor that space between drafts because you have a really different headspace. And whether it's that you're getting, thoughts from beta readers or an editor or your agent or whatever it might be, like that's a place where your kind of vision of the book is opening up, you're vulnerable, and you're seeing the book in a new way. And that is so valuable. And that's where the kind of real work of revision happens. It starts from that place. So, however you go about it, I think that it's important to sort of give yourself the time to step back and see it in a new light, and then think about, well, what do I want to do with this thing, and where do I want to take it, and how do I get from here to there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
I hope that's encouraging. Natalia, are you there?
Yes, hello, I'm here.
Okay. Are you
I,
gonna put your camera on, or should you just gonna ask a question?
Just a question.
Okay.
So kind of going off of the end of that there, I've seen kind of recommendations for beta reading or just giving like a whole list of questions, and then actually Sandra Schofield, again, her book, The Last Draft, said just to give like don't ask for very detailed feedback. And I'm just wondering what's the best way, to get as much out of beta readers, or, what is there something specific that you're looking for, or how do I approach that?
mm, I mean, when I have beta readers, when I am using beta readers, when I'm doing it for other people, when I'm, working with thesis students or clients or what have you, like it's always the same. I think that it's good to have those questions in mind. But you really want someone to approach the book as they would approach, a book they took off the shelf, which is not knowing that much.
Mhm.
And, um, if you have something really huge, like you're like, I'm really thinking about structure. I don't know how I want to structure things, can you kind of like keep that in mind? Like that's good and important to have the readers keep in mind, but you don't want to bog them down too much. You want them to respond, I think, authentically to the project. And often I find, especially with students and clients, I find that the questions that they have are very different than the feedback and suggestions that I have.
Okay.
And they're connected, like they're running on parallel tracks or they're intersecting, but often they're quite different.
Thank you.
Thanks, Natalia. Monica, you're up next.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Everybody. Yeah,
Thank you.
it's great. And thanks for organizing it, Shirin. It's great. So I have a question that I don't know if it does relate to what we're talking about, really. I read Watchmen of Cairo,
Yeah.
and I actually didn't read it. I listened to it. It's really
Oh,
fun
yeah.
to listen to.
Yeah.
And as we're talking about character, I was like realizing that, first of all, wondering how you edit those very long descriptions, which have the character in and out of streets in Cairo with vendors and street urchins running around stealing wallets, or, there's a lot of stuff going on in there. And I realized I really get a sense of where they are from this. And I get a sense of the characters interacting in that, but there's just a lot of stuff going on. And a lot of people, at first I thought, well, maybe that's too much description. Why are you doing all this description? So I'll ask you, why do you do all that description, and how do you decide to edit, how do you edit it?
I think, with that book, I really wanted to give the reader a sense of this place that a lot of people who are reading it have not been. And so that was important to me. And that's probably one of the reasons that there is so much description. I wanted to give a sense of how this place has changed from the 10th century to the 19th century to the present. I think in my most recent book, which is also set in the past, also in a place that probably a lot of people have not been, or a place where they think that they know what it's like, but it was very different 100 years ago. I've had a little bit less description, and I try to make sure that the description is always serving a plot purpose. Right? Like I think that in my first two books, I kind of was like, okay, I'm setting the scene. And, it's important for the reader to sort of know where they are. And a lot of people really love that. And I've gotten a lot of good feedback about that. But with this book, for whatever reason, because it's a little more fast paced, I wanted to be sure that the physical descriptions were, for the most part, having another purpose as well. Whether they're moving the plot forward or whether they're revealing some sort of information that we don't know already, or whether they're revealing something about the character that we don't know, that they're sort of like experiencing this place in a way that sort of shows that they're angry or melancholy or what have you. So that's the kind of half answer to the question.
Thank you. Yeah. And I did love going into those places. So
thank you. No, I know, but I think it's a good question. I think it's and especially when we're sort of thinking about what we can cut, that's like an easy thing to cut when you're revising, but it can also really serve a purpose, and maybe that purpose is just grounding the reader in a time and place that they are not familiar with. That's fine too.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Virginia?
Yeah. So in our breakout room, we were struggling with desire and that what our character wants. And one of the things that kind of came up was internal versus external desire. Like how,
Mm.
like, is it, should the character's desire sort of encompass that? Like what is it that they, it's related to like what do they think they want to happen, and then what really happens? I mean, how would you,
All right, so is internal and external desire the difference between what they say or think they want versus what's really driving them deep down?
so yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's important to kind of distinguish between that. I think that I would say desire is, when I'm thinking about desire, I'm thinking about what's really driving them deep down, and what's making them do the things they do. And it's always really interesting when a character thinks that they want one thing, but they actually want something else. I mean, every person in the world is like that in some way or another. And that makes them really human, right? And that makes them interesting as a character um, and if the reader is astute and the writer is good at what they're doing, then, the reader can pick up on that discordance, whether, subconsciously or consciously, will feel, oh, this author, this character says they want this. Um, they're even thinking they want this, and yet why are they acting that way?
Mhm.
I think that's really rich and can create a lot of conflict just in and of itself, right?
Yeah. 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 Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, that's great. Thank you for that question. Any last little burning things?
Well, actually, I am going to read one on behalf of, I think it was Shannon, who just wanted to know what type of plot outline you're planning to use.
Oh, good question. I'm not totally sure yet. I think I'm just gonna like write out plot points and then flesh them out, like kind of make from outline to like paragraph, and then kind of like put the different paragraphs. I don't know if this is too granular and specific, but then put the different paragraphs on index cards and then arrange them and be like, oh, do these? Because, first there's a matter of like, how do chapters work, right? Like because you can have multiple plot points in a single chapter. You probably should. And like, which ones go together? And is it these two and then these three, or is it these three and then these next three, or what have you? And then once you do that, there's going to be two plot lines. How are these things braided together? So I think it'll be kind of like an increasingly complex and deep process.
Hmm. I'm really looking forward to hearing about it. I
Yeah.
think that, I mean, we have known each other a very long time, and one of the things that I've really enjoyed about our friendship is always getting to hear how the other person's working, and the other person's always, I think, working slightly differently from the last time
Yeah.
spoke. And
Likewise.
yeah, that's
Likewise.
been so
You gotta
cool.
grow. You gotta like, you're always trying to build a better mousetrap.
Hmm. Hmm. So, okay, just a little bit of housekeeping. As everybody else in this room knows, and I'm sure you know, also I refer a lot of editing. In it, I used to edit myself. I've stopped doing that for a few years now, so I've been referring a lot of editing. If any of the writers here want help with their revisions, or even like before they even start revising, a dev edit or like or a manuscript appraisal. There's so many different words to describe all the different things. Um, are you available to help?
I am. I am. I'm actually on sabbatical right now,
Oh,
and will be until the end of the summer. And so usually I only do that in the summers and sometime in the winters. But now you know, have some spots in the spring and summer, and so I'm very open to it. But
okay.
also understand that, it's important to be at the right moment. And so,
Right.
yeah.
Right. And also, okay, so we'll come back and talk about that in one second, what you mean by the right moment. But I was gonna say, to be more specific though, like so for instance, I used to do full def edits and that was all I did. I didn't do manuscript assessments and nor did I take like 3 chapters or anything. So what are you like where's your sweet spot? What kind of
I
stuff?
love it when someone is done with a draft and feeling really stuck and they don't know how to move forward. That's my favorite time to get in there. Um, because I'm happy to work with someone who kind of knows where they want to go, but I also feel like if you know where you want to go, go there, and then to me. Um,
Michael, it's not that
but
easy for all
we
of
can
us. I
get
just want you
stuck
to
at different
know.
you can get stuck at different moments, right? Like I've had many drafts where I got stuck halfway through and I was like, I know that if I keep going, it's just going to be a waste of time. So it doesn't have to be a full draft, but I think that my sweet spot is where you just don't know how to move forward and you want some really close attention to your manuscript.
Mhm. Okay. And can they just email you at the email address through your website, which
Yeah, totally. And
throw into the chat for everybody?
that's a good one. And then I'll drop it in the chat in case this is maybe even a better one than what's on my website. Oh, look at that. You beat me to it.
No, but I put your website one on.
Oh yeah, that's my website one. I check them both.
Yeah.
I
I
check
wasn't gonna be presumptuous.
I
I
put
put your
the
personal
Gmail
email
is the one
out,
I
but
kind of use more regularly. Sometimes Cuckoo Banana people email me from my website, and so I like to just have it in my Yahoo. Somehow that feels better to me than having it in my Gmail.
okay. Well, unless anybody has anything else, thank you so much, Michael, for spending all this time with us and taking the time to go over and answer all our questions. And it was a great
My
workshop.
pleasure.
I actually think
And
that I've got a few ideas for what I'm doing. So
nice.
excellent.
Thank you for having me. Thank you all for spending your Thursday evening with, thinking about writing.
Okay, and I will be sending everybody the link to the recording in hopefully by Tuesday. So
Amazing.
thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much.
That's
Bye,
right.
everybody.
Bye.